Good evening and welcome. I'm David Wood from the Pacific Science Centre, and I'm going to be your host for tonight's virtual Science in the City talk. Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time to connect with us this evening. Before we start tonight's talk, I'd like to share a few bits of information with everybody first. We've uploaded some of our past Science in the City talks to YouTube, and that includes topics ranging from cannabis regulations and testing. We did that one on 420. 2 days later was Earth Day, so we were talking about eco-psychology with Dr. Peter Kahn. We also got talks on robotic pizza production, war in outer space, hornets, and even last week's talk where we discussed the intersection of environmental science and social justice. So to check out those past talks and to check out a whole heap of other stuff, check out the Science in the City tab on PacSci's YouTube page. We also encourage everyone to stay in the loop about upcoming Science in the City talks by signing up for our e-newsletter at pacsci.org/SITC. That's for Science in the City. So sign up for our e-newsletter so you can stay in the loop and stay connected with local scientists and researchers at pacsci.org/SITC. Educational programming like this is made possible in part thanks to the generous support of our donors. In the face of challenges like COVID-19 and climate change, science and an informed public are absolutely essential. So if you're able to, as part of tonight's event, we suggest a $10 donation to help us ensure that curiosity never closes. For more information about donating to the Pacific Science Centre, visit pacsci.org/support. Okay, moving on to tonight's event. Human activities such as poaching, pollution, ocean plastics, and ship strikes have profound impacts on the health of our oceans. These impacts are felt at all trophic levels, including apex predators such as our southern resident killer whales or the endangered North Pacific right whale. Since the global shutdown, there's obviously been sweeping changes to human behavior and human activity. But how have these changes impacted marine wildlife? Well, today we're going to meet filmmakers and researchers who closely observe life in our oceans. Firstly, we're joined by whale researcher Dr. Deborah Giles, who is a research scientist at the University of Washington Center for Conservation Biology. She's also a lecturer at the Friday Harbor Labs. Giles works alongside her esteemed colleague Eba, who is a conservation canine trained to detect scat. And we're going to meet Eba today, which is a great honor. She was the recent star of Disney's It's a Dog's Life with Bill Farmer. She's the newest Disney princess. Together, they investigate the health of endangered southern resident killer whales and other species of whales in the Salish Sea. We're also going to be joined by our friends from Deep Green Wilderness. Those are filmmakers Kevin Campion and Shawnecee Schneider, who've been studying and following Pacific Northwest whales for years. Kevin and Shawnecee will be sharing segments of their Right Over the Edge documentary, which focuses on the search for the North Pacific right whale. They're going to be explaining the basics of the North Pacific right whale species, and they'll also discuss why saving them matters right now. Again, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, any stories, something resonates with you, we really want to hear from you and we want to connect with you. So at any time you've got a question, a comment, or a thought, leave it in the YouTube comment section, because following tonight's presentations and after we've heard from our experts, we're going to be connecting your questions with those experts. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first experts to the live stream, and that's Kevin and Shawnecee. Hi, Kevin and Shawnecee. Welcome. Hey.
Hey, everybody, and thanks, David. It's pretty awesome to be here, which is in my kitchen. This is the easiest commute I've had to a presentation in a very long time. It's also pretty awesome to be here because Shawnecee is my best friend, and it feels a little bit like we're hanging out, which we haven't got to do in a very long time. And Giles is an old friend, and it's fun to get to hang out with her. And then, thank you to everyone at Pacific Science Center, David and Carolina and Jen for hosting this whole thing. And I am a huge North Pacific right whale enthusiast as well as a couple other hats I wear. And so I'm just thankful to all of you out there in the audience, wherever you guys are at, for taking the time today to spend a little while to learn about these awesome whales and about southern resident killer whales and the super crucial work that Giles is doing. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, some pretty inspiring stuff in our city in Seattle that's awesome, and some pretty, things are strange with COVID, and so it's fun to get to focus in on whales just for a little bit. So my name again, it's probably on the screen there, is Kevin Campion, and I'm gonna let's see if I can fire up my PowerPoint here for you all. Awesome, thank you. Okay. So when I'm not making films about North Pacific right whales, I run a program called Deep Green Wilderness. And Deep Green Wilderness is a sailboat-based marine conservation and education program. And we take students, mainly middle and high school students, sailing for multi-week voyages to learn about whales and marine conservation. We are shut down for this year for obvious reasons. We're not doing our voyages, but 2021 we will be doing we'll be getting back underway. So check out deepgreenwilderness.com if you know a teenager that you think would like to learn about whales and go sailing. So our mission at Deep Green Wilderness is to help the sea create change that's meaningful to the ecosystem, the community, and the future. That's our formal mission. Our informal mission is to create ambassadors for the Northwest coast. We'd say one whale at a time. We take students out, we show them whales, we give them some context to really appreciate that and understand how conservation works for those whales, and they leave our boat really strong advocates for those whales and for the ecosystem that is the Salish Sea and the Northwest coast. So that's Deep Green Wilderness. And then on to North Pacific right whales. So I wouldn't know about North Pacific right whales if it wasn't for this guy right here, whose name is Brian Gisborne. Brian's one of the saltiest guys that I've ever met in my life. He spent more time at sea alone looking for whales and seals than anyone else I've ever heard of, where he does contract research work for the Department of Fishery and Oceans in Canada. And here's a picture of his course from 1 year's worth of effort. So this is right here, the northwest tip of Washington and the southwest tip of Vancouver Island. So thousands of miles that he covered underway for 1 year. And he was offshore by himself in a place called Swiftsure Bank, which is where all those lines connect there at the entrance to Straits of Juan de Fuca, doing whale and sea lion surveys when he saw this amongst a group of humpback whales that he was looking at. So this, Brian clearly recognized, was not a humpback whale. And he wondered what he was looking at. He had a hunch, and then he saw this. So this is a North Pacific right whale. And this particular whale was the second one seen in 2013. And they were those two together were the first North Pacific right whales seen in British Columbia or Canada since 1951. And in 1951, this is what the right whale looked like that was seen. So this whale was killed by whalers at the Cole Harbor Whaling Station in the north corner of Vancouver Island. This whale was killed about 250 miles northwest of Seattle. It was killed illegally because then, as now, North Pacific right whales were protected. But then there was that gap of 1951 until 2013 when no one saw in Canada, no one saw a North Pacific right whale, and just a few in the US. And in 2013, when Brian saw that whale, which actually swam down into Washington waters, is when I found out about these North Pacific white whales. At the time, I didn't even know there were a species that existed. And so it just shows you how rare they are, that I make my living on the water. I spend my life out there teaching about whales, and I didn't even know this whale existed. So I became curious, And this is a question I asked myself and asked everyone I could think of, and started looking for answers. What is a North Pacific right whale? Well, it turns out that a North Pacific right whale is a baleen whale. They're one of the largest animals on the planet. They're not the longest, but they can get up to 60 feet long, and the biggest individuals are right around 100 tons. So the biggest blue whale in the world, which is the biggest animal in the world, is also about 100 tons. So the biggest right whale is pretty near one of the largest whales or largest animals ever to live on the planet. So they're a baleen whale, and they're what is called a ram feeder. So they swim through the water or at the surface or at depth with their mouth open with these baleen plates and forcing food into their mouth. So, and what is that food? It looks just like this. So these are copepods. These creatures right here are about the size of a grain of rice. And they occur in such densities that right whale was able to swim through a cloud of them with its baleen filters. And from these grain of rice size creatures, it's able to create an animal that weighs 100 tons. So, and there's good evidence that shows that they don't even start feeding until they reach these really insane densities of copepods. So something like, it's like 20 million per cubic meter. So very abundant critter. It turns out it's a really great way to make a living, to make a big whale. So as you might expect, North Pacific right whales live in the North Pacific. So here's a range map of where they occur. So they occur in two populations. There's a population off the coast of Russia and Japan and Korea, and then a population off our coast from the Bering Sea down to Baja. But we actually know very little about where right whales go and what they do. Mostly what we know is from the Southeast Bering Sea, and we know very little about when they're outside of the Bering Sea, where they go. So here's a map of where they are often, not often, but where they have been found in the Southeast Bering Sea. And the reason we know so little is because there's so few of them. And the reason there are so few of them is from historic whaling. And so the Northwest coast and the Northwest tip of Washington and the Southwest tip of Vancouver Island have always, for thousands of years, been the cultural epicenter of whaling in the Pacific. And so for thousands of years, humpback whales, gray whales, and right whales were targeted by folks that lived there. But it was really the commercial whaling that happened in a few different waves between 1840 all the way until 1967, when the last whaling station closed down. It was that commercial whaling that severely decimated the population of whales. And pardon me for the pictures of dead whales here, but it really drives the point home. So I'm going to flip my notes here real quick. So commercial whaling started in 1840, and you're going to see a little bit about this. We're going to show a little bit of our film, or not a little bit of our film, just a couple little works in progress from it. And it features a guy named Phil Clapham, who explains a little bit more about the numbers. But between 1840 and 1850, which was a long time ago, but it was really the height of the commercial whaling for North Pacific right whales. They think they killed 20 to 30,000 North Pacific right whales in that period, which is insane to me. And right whales have kind of in fits and starts recovered a little from that, but commercial whaling was still occurring as they recovered. And so we're at the point now where they think there's only about 30 North Pacific right whales left in the Eastern Pacific. There have been many changes to the ocean environment since COVID. The shipping is down, and commercial fishing and recreational fishing are down. And depending on what port and where you're at, they're down more or less. Port of LA is like down 20%. I couldn't actually find statistics for Port of Seattle, but it turns out that the entanglement in commercial fishing gear, like in this diagram right here, and strikes from ships are the two leading causes of mortality in right whales, at least North Atlantic right whales, which is another species of right whale. There's 3 species of right whale worldwide. And with North Atlantic, that ship strike and entanglement are the leading causes of mortality. So currently, there are less boats on the water and there's less fishing gear in the water. So this might mean something good for North Pacific right whales and North Atlantic right whales. And then I mentioned that the Southeast Bering Sea is where we have all these data points from, where right whales have been seen in the most recently. However, sorry, let me go back here. My notes, the presenter view won't load up, so I'm working off some paper notes here, so I'm a little out of order. Pardon. So Southeast Bering Sea right here is where you have most of the data collected from white whales in the past few decades. And this is actually, this shape right here designates the critical habitat that has been federally designated for North Pacific right whales. And right in the center of this habitat is a acoustic buoy called Peggy. She looks like this. We actually got to take an expedition out to Peggy this last summer. And you'll see a little footage from that here in just a moment. And so people get to see right whales if they go out here. And on a good year, there's actually people looking for right whales. But on most years, they're not a good year for research. And they just have to rely on the acoustics and what they record of the right whales to know if they're there or not. And when they get a recording, this is what it sounds like.
We're not hearing it, unfortunately, there, Kevin.
Okay.
Could you do your best whale impression?
Well, stand by. Okay, you can hear me though, yeah?
We can hear you, but we can't hear the acoustics, okay. Unfortunately.
Okay, well, it is the call we were playing is called a gunshot call, and so it is named like it sounds. And I'll let you guys imagine what it sounds like, and you can look that up on Google. But basically, so that buoy sits out there and listens for whales, and like I mentioned, on a good year, it gets right whale detections. But they're also right whales. So one of the things we don't know about North Pacific right whales is where they go when they're not in this little corner of the Southeast Bering Sea. And so we know that they're in the Southeast Bering Sea more or less in the summertime and on the shoulder seasons leading up to the summertime. But we know from that buoy, which is recording the whales, that in the wintertime, the whales aren't there, or we get very few recordings of the whales. And sometimes, some winters, it's actually even covered in ice in this area. So obviously there's not whales there that winter. And since 1840 and people's really documenting the occurrences of North Pacific right whales, we've still been unable to detect where they go to calf and where they go to breed. And we know for North Atlantic right whales and southern right whales that they go to warmer climates and calmer climates to do both those things. But we don't know where that is for North Pacific right whales. And so there have been some recent sightings, though, that might indicate where this is. And so I've made this little thing that is just the sighting since 1996. And what's really cool, and really the two kind of takeaways I'd love folks to get from this, is that right now that the habitat in the ocean is quieter and less encumbered by ships and fishing gear. And so it's a good time to be out doing research for right whales, and it's a good time to sort of just refocus on what the ocean could be like for them. And then also, there has been, over the last 7 years, there's been on average one right whale seen outside of the Bering Sea a year. And that actually is not a lot of whales, but it's more than have been seen in a couple of decades. And so not only should we be paying attention to right whales because of this pandemic and different ocean conditions and different human interactions with the ocean, but also there might be some clues that the right whales are starting to show us about where their breeding habitat is and where their calving habitat is as they're turning up outside of the Bering Sea. So as you can see, in 1996, there was a whale off of Baja and Hawaii, 98 off of California, 2013, this is the first one seen in BC since 1951, is off of Haida Gwaii. And then this is the one that Brian found. And then 2015, 2 whales were seen off of California. And a couple of these sightings are unconfirmed, but which just means that researchers weren't able to go out and get photos of them. But if a reliable source saw the whale, I've included it here. 2017, there was a couple more off California. 2018, Haida Gwaii. And then lastly, just a month ago, one was seen off Vancouver Island, which was really cool to see and unexpected and pretty awesome. There's a cool little video clip of it. One of the coolest things about all these whales that have been seen outside of the Southeast Bering Sea is each individual has been new to science. It hasn't been a whale that had been seen before. So it might tell us a little more about that population of whales. So thank you for listening to my scattered thoughts about North Pacific right whales. I'm about to hand it over to Shawnecee Schneider, who I'm making the film with, is somewhere in California, and she's been busy editing the film after she just finished her teaching degree, her master's in teaching. So congratulations for graduating, Shawnecee. I'll hand it over to you. And I'd just like to remind folks that you can type questions about right whales or orcas or anything on here in the comments, and we'll get to them. So Shawnecee will introduce the videos. You'll see me real quick, and then we'll hand it over to Giles.
Hello, everybody. First off, just a big thank you to everyone for putting this together. And of course, a shout out to my film partner, Kevin, and to our other film partner, Lindsay T-Rex Walker. So what you're about to see is 3 short pieces that are cuts or work in progress scenes from our feature-length documentary, Right Over the Edge, which will be coming out by the end of this year. Yeah, and we just want to acknowledge that we are all staying safe and healthy in our homes on colonized indigenous land, and also just a lot of love and solidarity to everyone out there fighting systemic racism and ending white supremacy. So enjoy the shorts. That's it. Thank you. Oh, and any questions you have, put them in the YouTube comments.
What bird is that? Is that the flicker too? That's...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Little squeaky toy sounding.
I remember having the flute in the water and going whoop, 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 you know, like making these funny sounds. And I was in the surf about up to my neck. They were just breaking behind me, and I looked, and there was a gray whale that brought her calf in, like right there. And it was just the coolest thing to see. I don't know if they heard me or not. I don't know what goes through my head if I see a whale, but I know through my heart I get more excited. I get more excited. I just get happy. And I really hope for those whales that they are protected. You know, there's a lot of Navy doing underwater blasting, and I heard some this summer. It was horrifying. It sounded like World War III, and I feel like we already are at World War III. We're just the privileged few that aren't right in the war zone, but the animals are on the front lines of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with that study that was done after 9/11, and it was just impromptu because they stopped all ship traffic, and because North Atlantic right whales are so heavily studied, they were able to take samples both before and after the tragedy that was 9/11 and the stopping of the ship traffic that resulted from that, and they noticed significant differences in the stress level. We know from scientific studies of North Atlantic right whales that that species is incredibly vulnerable to noise pollution, and it causes a host of problems, including stress, and can even cause death. But even the stress is particularly significant for North Pacific right whales because there's so few of them. We don't want these animals, suffering any stress. We need them reproducing.
The North Pacific right whale is actually the largest of the three species, and it is by far the most endangered. Right whales were given their name a long time ago because the whalers considered them the right whale to kill. And the reasons for that were they were very slow, that made them rather easy to catch. They floated when you killed them, which a lot of whales don't, and for primitive whalers that was a big advantage. And they also yielded a very large quantity of very valuable oil and baleen, the filtration system in the mouth that had many uses prior to the invention of plastic. So right whales were hunted. They were actually, as far as we know, they were probably the first species to be hunted regularly on a commercial basis. In 1835, the first whaling vessel came into the Gulf of Alaska, and there they reported seeing 1 million whales, which was obviously hyperbole, but it meant there were a lot of whales, and they meant right whales. So starting in 1835, the North Pacific right whale was hunted commercially on a pretty large scale, and just 14 years later, by 1849, the population had already been severely depleted, such that many of the whalers then moved on to other prey elsewhere. They were hunted in the western North Pacific as well, and by 1900 they were effectively commercially extinct. In other words, there just weren't enough to make them worthwhile hunting anymore.
So the ecosystem in the Bering Sea, it's very dynamic and it's very rich. Right whales probably once played a very important role in the ecosystem. Being a large baleen whale, I'm sure they did have quite a substantial effect. Now with only around 30 individuals or so, their specific effect on the ecosystem is probably pretty negligible. The Bering Sea is extremely productive, and there's quite a bit of zooplankton up there, copepods and euphausids, so it draws in a lot of large whale species, not just right whales, but humpbacks and fin whales and gray whales, minke whales. So it's a very highly productive area, and it's very seasonally dynamic because in the winter ice will come and cover a large majority of the Bering Sea. So that system is constantly changing every year, and the amount of ice that fluctuates from year to year will also affect the system. So it's very dynamic, but a very productive system up there. I have seen probably in the thousands of whales. I'm lucky I get to go out to sea every summer, so we see quite a few when we're out there. As for number of species, I've seen probably around 20 different species of whales or dolphins. And I have seen, I think, 14 or 15 unique North Pacific right whales.
All right, we're back.
Okay. So thanks everyone for watching that. We hope to have the film done as soon as possible. We have no idea what premiering it will be like because we don't know what theaters will be like in the next few months and in the next year. But if you're interested in following our progress and seeing the full film, you can visit rightwhalefilm.com and of course deepgreenwilderness.com will keep you updated as well. So thank you all for your interest in North Pacific right whales. And now I'd love to hand it off to Dr. Deborah Giles. And sweet, it worked out. Okay, Giles is here. Hi, Giles.
Hi, everybody.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much. So I just have Eba up here for a second. I'm going to have to put her down so I can run the computer. But this is our Scat detection dog, and I'll talk more about that when I get my PowerPoint up here. Thank you, everybody at the Pacific Science Center for inviting me, and Kevin for probably giving them the idea to invite me. I really appreciate it. I'm bummed that we're not going to see you guys out on the water at all this year. So my talk, Everybody Loves a Pooping Whale. I call it that because if you have a pooping whale, you have a whale that's eating. And that's what we definitely need to and want to be seeing with the southern resident killer whales. So I am with the Center for Conservation Biology at the University of Washington. I'm also the science and research director of a nonprofit called Wild Orca, where you can go and learn a lot more about the whales and our campaign, our Fair Fisheries campaign. I am a proud lecturer at the Friday Harbor Labs also. So if you're a student at the University of Washington, come on out to the Friday Harbor Labs and take my Marine Mammals of the Salish Sea class. So in Washington, we're really lucky to have 3 different ecotypes of killer whales that ply our waters. And when I say ecotype, what I mean is these different groups of whales. They're all considered Orcinus orca. The one designation for the species is every killer whale on the planet is called Orcinus orca. That's their genus and species name, given to them by Linnaeus, the godfather of taxonomic classification. He named them Orcinus orca, or demon dolphin, in 1758 because they were seen killing other whales. And so it was actually a translational switch. They were called whale killers. And, you know, with the change to English, they became killer whales a long time ago. But then again, demon dolphin isn't all that great either. So killer whales in Washington waters are mostly focused on the, in the past have been the southern resident killer whales. They were called residents because they could regularly be expected to come here into the inland waters of the Salish Sea. I'll show you a map in a second, in about early to mid-May and stay until the end of October, with J-pod coming more or less throughout the year, once or twice a month being seen of all months of the year. And then we also have the, again, so-called transient killer whales, which is the well-known name for those. Scientists and local folks here are really trying to get away from these resident, although the legal name for the southern resident killer whales, that is their legal name because they're on the endangered species list. Generally speaking, we're trying to call them fish eaters or mammal eaters, because really if we were looking at these whales now and starting the studies now, the transients are really much more resident than the residents are. And that's because they've got a lot of food here. So the mammal eaters eat seals and sea lions, the 2 different types of porpoises that we get here, and then an occasional Pacific white-sided dolphin also. A couple of the different transient or mammal-eating killer whales have been known to attack larger whales like minke whales. But generally speaking, these guys are pinniped and porpoise specialists. The offshores down here at the bottom, those guys have been well known to be shark eaters. We knew that from ones that had washed up on land, beached themselves and died, and their teeth were completely ground down to the gum line. We do now know from some colleagues at NOAA that the offshore killer whales also eat fish at some times of the year, but generally they're shark specialists. So these whale groups, these different ecotypes, are so genetically distinct that really they should be classified as different subspecies at least. But it's a bit of a rigmarole to get an animal named as a subspecies. And thankfully, under the Endangered Species Act here in the United States, there is a way to distinguish them as a special group called a DPS, or a distinct population segment. And that's what we have with the southern resident killer whales, because they are now listed on the endangered species list. So the southern residents are, they are wide ranging. Jays and Ks, these are made up of 3 pods. Jays are mostly the most resident of the pods, and they pretty much hang out around the Salish Sea, up around Vancouver Island, and up into the Johnstone Strait, and then up into the Haida Gwaii, formerly known as the Queen Charlotte Islands. Ks and Ls go down all the way to California. Ls more commonly seen in Monterey in the winter, and Ks down as far as Point Reyes. Our research is really focused here in the Salish Sea, mostly around the San Juan Islands. Our research boat goes out of San Juan, the west side of San Juan Island here. And our research can take us all the way up to the Fraser River here in Canada. This is the river that would have been having a lot of fish, Chinook salmon specifically, coming back to this river in the past, which is why we had the resident whales coming in every year regularly. Like I said, from about early to mid-May through October. That's not so much the case anymore. So as I said, the southern resident killer whale community or clan are all related to one another. We know that because they share a dialect. They do have distinct dialect among each pod, has its own dialect, but then they have shared calls. And that's really one of the first ways that scientists really started recognizing that there were different ecotypes, that these mammal eaters and fish eaters just really didn't speak the same language. So now, unfortunately, we're at the situation where we just have 72 of these individuals. At the beginning of this year, LPOD, a portion of LPOD was seen and documented by other researchers who did show that the L41's family was there. His sisters were documented along with their offspring, but L41 was not there. And that's going to be a big hit for that family because they are incredibly socially bonded animals. These whales stay with each other for essentially their whole life. There are a couple of oddities, but generally speaking, males and females stay with their mom her entire life. And then when she dies, it's not completely uncommon for the males to die within the first year of mom dying. But a lot of the males are bonded enough with their sisters that they just become part of that, their sister's matriline. So just down to 72 animals now. So the whales were listed in Canada in 2001 on their version of the endangered species list. It's called the SARA, Species at Risk Act. And then the United States listed them in 2005. And in the listing documents, in the kind of prep for these whales becoming identified as an endangered species, many different threat kind of categories were identified. But the 3 main ones are lack of quality and quantity prey, specifically Chinook salmon, toxicants in the water. So this is showing a picture of a group of southern residents in front of a highly industrialized area. So all sorts of toxicants that make their way into the marine realm and then up the food chain through bioaccumulation into the Chinook salmon and then ultimately into the whales. And then vessels and associated noise. This picture down here was taken by a local captain, and it really clearly shows how much these whales share the waters with these very large shipping container ship, ocean-going ships, as well as the wide variety of smaller boats that occur in and around the Salish Sea. So all of these were the main identified threats when the whales were listed. I'm often asked how it is that these whales can be, how can you have a massive whale that only eats fish? And this picture does a pretty good job of explaining that. When these fish were evolving, they co-evolved with the fish-eating killer whales. These fish are massive. The one on the left is 116-pound Chinook salmon, and the one on the right is 121-pound Chinook salmon, caught at the turn of the last century. Now, I just checked this morning, WDFW has on their website, so Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has on their website that the average Chinook salmon now is between 10 and 15 pounds. So if we go between that, 12 and a half pounds or so, the difference between a whale that in the past would have had to have caught 2 or 3 or maybe 4 of these massive, monster fish up here to get enough nutrients to sustain themselves and to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive, versus how much energy they would have to put in and how much time they have to spend now to catch so much smaller fish that are less quality. They have less lipid content because they're so much smaller. Oh dear, my computer's not advancing. I'm gonna.
Perhaps we could try and take it off and then come back on. Yeah.
Oh, it's my cursor that's not working. I'm sorry, guys. Can you guys see that?
Not at the moment. We're just seeing you right now.
Oh, lovely. Wow, I can't imagine what's gone wrong. I've never had this happen.
That's okay.
Okay, there we go.
Oh,
Did you get that? Can you see that?
No, we're just seeing you at the moment.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know what to say because my computer is now showing me the PowerPoint. Well, I'll just talk. Essentially, with the lack of salmon, the other threats that are identified threats to these whales, without having enough fish, it ends up meaning that the whales end up metabolizing their blubber. And when they metabolize their blubber, just like you and me when we go on fasts, once that fat starts getting metabolized, the toxicants that have been locked up in the system start moving through the whale's system and making them feel lethargic, and it makes them, it's harder to concentrate. We know this from human studies, and just generally making them more susceptible to disease. Furthermore, when the whales are not getting enough to eat, the boats that are in the area do end up impacting them in a way to cause higher stress levels. And so really what it boils down to is when the whales are getting enough to eat, the other threats that are facing them are not as much of a problem. But that's just simply not the case now because they're not getting enough to eat. So what we're doing in order to try and understand really what's happening is we utilize a specially trained scat detection dog who has been trained to stay on the front of the boat and to maneuver her body in a way to tell us when she is downwind of a fecal sample left by the southern residents. The dogs that we've trained, we've been doing this project since 2007. I've been with this project. It's a project led by Dr. Sam Wasser. And we have collected hundreds of samples using these scat detection dogs. They're able to smell samples up to a mile away, which is really fabulous. Usually we're about a half a mile, quarter of a mile to a half a mile behind the whales, so we never have to get anywhere near them. And therefore, we're not causing any stress to them. And so once we collect the samples can be analyzed for a tremendous amount of data. And really amazingly, we can answer questions that have to do with all of the identified threats. So what are their stress levels like based on stress hormones? What are their nutrition hormones like? Are they getting enough to eat? Also things like pregnancy. We can tell if a female is pregnant, and not only that she's pregnant, but how pregnant. And one of the studies that just came out in 2017, Sam Wasser is the lead author. He's the lead on this project, and he's the lead author on this study. Showed that 69% of females that we got samples on that were pregnant lost their baby before the baby was born viable, or just directly after the baby was born. That's a huge number of pregnancy losses for a population that's already in significant decline. And so we continue to collect the samples. We are analyzing them now for other things like microplastics and gut biome health. Also, we can look at things like prey DNA. So what are the whales eating? Specifically, we know that they're eating salmon, or fish, I should say, mostly salmon. And out of that salmon, it's mostly up to 80% or more Chinook salmon. But the prey DNA will help us kind of drill down into exactly what they're eating at different times of the year. So really, we look at these samples that we're able to collect non-invasively using the dogs as an opportunity to answer a tremendous amount of questions about this endangered population of animals, and ultimately put that science in the hands of policymakers so that more and more can be understood about them, and more protections can be put in place to try and help recover this population of animals. Last thing I'll leave you with before maybe we go to questions is somebody asked me today, what's the, so there's 72 of these animals. There are other killer whales around the world. In fact, there are mammal-eating killer whales that occur right here in this water. What's the big deal? Why work so hard to try and recover this population of animals? And my answer to that is that this population of animals is unique in the world. There are no other animals like these southern resident killer whales. And as a researcher, an amazing woman, Alexandra Morton, said last year, and it really hit home for me, she said, if we lose this population of animals and we allow them to go extinct, it'll be the first time in history that a population, that a species, a group of animals goes extinct, and we know every single individual. And so that's really a powerful thing to think. These animals are culturally unique. And like I said, there's no other ones on the planet like them. And the last part of that answer is that every single thing that's causing these whales to decline is our fault. It's actions that we've taken that have caused this population to be really teetering on the edge of extinction, on this knife edge of extinction. And so it's our responsibility to reverse some of that. And I do believe that it's not too late. These whales are incredibly resilient animals, and they have a seemingly inexhaustible desire to live. And so we humans, this species, needs to do everything that we can to try and kind of roll back some of the things that we've done that are causing harm to these whales, because ultimately everything that's harming these whales is also harming us. And so I'll leave you with that they're worth saving, and it's not too late.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giles. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but thank you for still rolling with us and bringing us that message. I'm also going to welcome Kevin and Shawnecee back to the live stream. Thank you. We're all here. Thank you, everybody. Like Dr. Giles said, we're going to be moving on to the Q&A now. So if you're watching from home, give us your questions, your comments, your stories. We've already been getting some great comments. Shawnecee, congratulations, Shawnecee, on your degree. We've also got a load of clapping emojis when we saw sections of your documentary, so that was nice to see. Also some love for Peggy the Buoy. Peggy the Buoy, very popular. in the comment section. As well as the comment, this is amazing. Are there any way that we can support Deep Green Wilderness and the great work that you do? And so I'll start with the folks from Deep Green Wilderness. What are some of the ways, and you touched on this in your presentation, what are some of the ways that folks can get involved in the work you do, whether it's teens in summer programs, adult citizen science opportunities? How can folks get involved in the work that you all are doing at Deep Green Wilderness and support your work?
Well, thank you. And I will say that the team at Deep Green Wilderness does need some support right now, because I won't say who, but after Giles, especially the last part of the talk there, one of the Deep Green Wilderness filmmaking team was crying a little bit about orca conservation. I got the text message. So we need support. No, thank you for that. And I mean, what we do is expensive. Like getting kids on the water is expensive. And so like, if you feel that it's important to connect students with whales and the ecosystem in a meaningful way, we're always happy to take your money and put it towards good use. And you can of course do that on our website. But I think more importantly, and what really helps our work is to like stay engaged with the causes that we're working on. I would love to spend my time not trying to save North Pacific right whales and just going out and enjoying them or doing something else. But there are these causes that like North Pacific right whales or like southern resident killer whales that are important to us and to our community and to the Pacific Northwest, and staying engaged and realizing when you can help. It's Orca Month right now, so there's lots of sort of pushes right now to comment to your legislators, and Giles may be able to speak more to that, but just staying engaged with these issues and staying up to date is super helpful as well. And Shawnecee, do you have any other way you want to? Okay, sweet.
And Dr. Giles, what ways can folks support your work, get involved in your work with citizen science, or just supporting conservation efforts broadly?
Thank you for bringing up the Orca Month. The fact that June is Orca Month in Washington State, Oregon State, and also BC, Canada. There is a website and Facebook page that you can go to, Orca Month. It's Orca Action Month now, and there are a number of different ideas about things that you can do to plug in. I would say how to get involved and how to make a difference is to educate yourself like you're doing tonight with these talks, and then pass on the information that you learn. The other thing is to use your power of being a voter. There's what I would say is, unless a politician has the environment as one of the major platforms that they're standing and running on, you don't want to vote for them. We really can't afford to have politicians in places of power that are rolling back environmental policies, like what is happening right now, unfortunately. So vote often and vote well. And then if you want to get involved, right now it's so hard because of COVID, but you can certainly go to you can go to Eba's website if you want to donate to the Orca Scat Project, or the Whale Scat Project, I should say. I didn't talk about it today, but we have expanded our project and Eba's repertoire to collect mammal-eating killer whales as well as baleen whale feces. So Eba has her own website. It's Eba the Whale Dog. And you can donate there if you're interested in helping to support our on-the-water work. But also, you can learn a lot about our Fair Fisheries campaign on that site. So ours is just one. Deep Green Wilderness is another. They've got some great information on their website. Sea Doc Society is another one to go and learn about the issues. And then if you want to get your hands dirty, I would recommend Whale Scout, which is a fabulous group based in near Seattle, but they're kind of branching out. And they put people to work planting trees on rivers. So the concept is trees for orcas. Because without kind of riparian corridors, the salmon are not going to have an opportunity and a place to spawn. So if you want to help whales, plant trees.
Thank you for that. And a reminder, we will be saving this video on YouTube. So if you want to share with friends and family after today's presentation, please feel free to do so. after today's presentation, we'll also try and get some of the links to some of these websites and these organizations that have been mentioned in the description too for everybody. Moving on, getting a little bit silly here. So Dr. Giles, we got a question from the audience that asks, how do you actually catch the scat? How do you get it out of the water into the boat or into some kind of container?
Yeah. So after Eba takes us to it, and I wonder if maybe I'll be able to add my actual PowerPoint to the YouTube video in some way. Maybe we can talk about making that happen, because I did have a good picture of it. We have scoops. They're beakers that are about this big, and they're on wooden dowels that we've kind of MacGyvered together, these poop scoops. And so Eba takes us to the sample, and we just barely touch the surface of the water, and the sample kind of flows right into that beaker. We then take that beaker and pour off the excess water, and we decant the fecal matter into 50 ml tubes, which are about this big. And ideally, we would get a full one, but you know, with the whales not having enough food, we're lucky sometimes if we can collect, you know, a piece of scat that's the size of your fingernail. Eba can smell it, our dogs can smell it, and they can take us to it, but sometimes it's so small, you know, there's barely anything to collect, and that's because the whales are not getting enough to eat. So that's how we do it. We scoop it out of the water using these scoops, and then put it in 50 ml tubes, and then we actually spin it down in a centrifuge on the boat. And then after the excess water is again poured off, we put it on in an ice chest, and then take it back to a deep freezer here on the island.
Okay, and so so another question here, and I think this was mentioned maybe in both presentations too, but how do you know that there is a difference in the stress levels of the whales? You both referenced that you can measure the differences in the stress levels of whales. So how are you measuring that? So you've got your scat sample, you've taken it back to the lab. How are you? What is it like to determine those stress levels?
So what they're looking in the lab, in Dr. Wasser's lab, they're looking for different hormones. And there are a variety of different hormones. So depending on if it's kind of an acute or a chronic stress, can be looked at depending on what hormone. So it's hormone analysis. And what we found in our paper with Catherine Ayers, Dr. Ayers as the lead author on this study, and it's available for free online. Her last name is spelled Ayres. And that study showed that the stress hormones were higher when the whales were not getting enough to eat, and even higher than that when there were large numbers of vessels in the vicinity. So when the whales are getting enough to eat, the stress hormone levels are lower. But when they're not getting enough to eat, they go higher. And then in the presence of a lot of vessels, they go higher still. So that's kind of a simple way of explaining it, but it's hormone levels that we're looking at.
Thank you. So, you know, collecting scat samples, it's not always the most glamorous work. I think people have a very romantic notion in their minds when you're out in the ocean and you're studying wildlife. Kevin and Shawnecee, you know, you're spending so much time out in sea, you know, capturing wildlife on camera. Obviously, it has its challenges. It's not always the most glamorous. For you, what is that like? What are some of the challenges that you face? You know, just little everyday things while you're out filming and when you're out in the ocean.
I think my challenges are probably often similar to Shaughnessee's, in that I think the most challenging thing for all of us is like going to sea with your best friends, and you know, which is like the most wonderful and like so awesome, and then you know you're just spending too much time with each other. But I think that, I mean, the biggest challenge for us is looking for something that is so insanely rare. You know, it's every single person we interviewed about right whales described them as a needle in a haystack. Like every whale researcher said, oh, it's a needle in a haystack. And and it's true, and that we're looking for 30 individuals that could be between Baja California or the Bering Sea, which is a pretty big chunk of ocean. And so there is that like just mega challenge every time we're out there trying to find and film these guys. And then, you know, all the things that make going to sea awesome are also challenges, the discomfort of you know, being seasick or whatever it is. What's challenging for you, Shawnecee?
Well, and I mean, yeah, of course, being out to sea with these people you like, it's tough, but it's not that. It's not as complicated as getting everything together. So getting all the supplies. I mean, honestly, like for me, because I'm crewing for some of the shoots and I'm running camera, I'm also producing, so I'm organizing everything, and I'm running sound. And then also I'm working with another camera person, which sometimes is the first time I've worked with that person on board in the sea, looking for whales. So it's a lot of variables. So I think the biggest thing, especially with this Bering Sea shoot we just did, was just like having doubles of everything and having all the weird extra batteries you need, having all the weird things, you know, mic mounts, yeah, that was really challenging, I think, to get everything up to the Aleutians at the right time. I mean, I think I flew when we went up to the Bering Sea last year, I think I flew with 6 bags, like huge sea bags, like a lot of stuff into a tiny airport. So that was a big challenge. But yeah, overall, it's all worth it, you know, and you'll have to watch the film to find out if we found a right whale or not.
Well, indeed. So, does anything does any of you have a moment that just really sticks with you while you're out in the water? Maybe you caught a glimpse of something that you've been, you know, we won't divulge whether or not you saw a North Pacific right whale, but is there a moment that really sticks in the mind of something that was just incredible or just kind of humbled you in a way that when you see wildlife doing its thing, that sometimes it really resonated with you? Can you think of any of those times or experiences where that happened?
Kevin.
Yeah, I've tried. Yes, it's so rich out there that it's like, especially like the last 2 shoots we've done for the right whale film were in the Bering Sea and then off of Vancouver Island, and I like each day I'm like, oh, this is the best day. We're seeing the coolest thing. Like seeing albatross, in like, just like you're seeing the coolest animals. And I'm trying to think of like a real specific one. And oddly enough, the thing that really sticks out for me, just as far as like a wildlife experience that for whatever reason is popping up, is seeing having a bear walk about 10 feet past us on the beach, and it has nothing to do with whales or right whales, but just being like our friend Erob, who's also in the film, comes back from like right around like this little headland on the beach, and she's like, it's a bear. And so we're all like kind of together in this bear, this black bear, you know, this bear, but just like, I mean, I love right whales, but I love like robin or whatever. So like I'm excited about all this stuff, and it's every day is rich when you're out there with these things.
Or what about the warbler that landed on the boat in the sea? That was really cool.
We're like, you know, 300 miles from any land, and a bird this big that like weighs about as much as a penny, you know, lands on the boat and hangs out with us. And you can never anticipate what you will see.
Dr. Giles, are there any moments or any places or things that you've caught a glimpse of that have really stuck with you?
What I'm missing so much, and we used to get to see them a couple times a year, are it's a greeting ceremony by the Southern residents. So they would do it, for example, if J-Pod was the first one back into their summer core critical habitat in May, and then later in the month, or maybe in June, K's or L's would come in. They do this ceremony, they used to, where they line up facing each other. So the whole pod, like all of J-Pod, lined up together, peck to peck, facing off against whichever, or not against, but well, yeah, whichever new group had come in, and they just hover like that in the water. And it can be, 50 feet or 250 feet or something. It's different, but with just hovering there quietly, like with hydrophones down, not a sound, a squeak, nothing is being made. And then I don't know what the social cue is, but one of the whales gives a cue, and then suddenly it's just like this crazy whale party. And it's just a phenomenal thing to have gotten to see in the past. And it just feels like these large extended families coming back together after not seeing each other for a year, like at Thanksgiving or Christmas or something like that, and just checking each other out, and really just seeming to enjoy seeing each other again for that first time. That'll always stick with me.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. Certainly not a lot of experiences that people maybe Bernie Sanders has a little bird land on his podium, but pretty rare. So Dr. Giles, we got a question from our audience here that asks, how many dogs are trained for tracking whales? Could you tell us a little bit more about Eba's history and the Conservation Canines program at University of Washington?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. My half my slideshow was going to be about where the dogs come from and then how we train them. So I'm really sorry. It's frozen on one of my slides here. I can't even see you guys. So Eba's a bit of an anomaly because she was actually my companion animal first. My sister found her in 2015 and wandering around the streets of Sacramento. And my sister had her for about a year and a half. And then there was a conflict with their other dog. And so I ended up adopting Eba. And I had her for almost 2 years before we decided to try and train her. And the reason we decided to try and train her is because one of the former trainers, dog trainers from Pac Forest, from our Conservation Canines program, noticed that she was really intent on her toy. And so he tested her and right away decided that she probably had what it took to be a scent dog. So we did train her last year. On the 24th of June was her first day in training. We trained her here on San Juan Island using some older Scat samples. We had about the two trainers from Pac Forest, Tammy and Julianne, came up and worked with me and Eba for about 5 days. And it was pretty amazing how fast Eba took to it. It's a series of maneuvers coupling that smell with their toy, and then slowly moving the reward farther and farther away in space, so that we're hiding the sample and then having the dog go and find it. The whale work is a little bit different. So that's about where the land-based or terrestrial-based training happens. With the whale work, there's one more step in that you have to take a sample, put it in a bowl, and then float the bowl out in the water and then drive the boat away from it. And we would start out at, something like 200 feet or, 300 feet, and then progressively move the boat farther and farther and farther away. And the idea is to drive the boat downwind of where that sample is, whether it's a wild whale sample in the water, where did the whales just leave, and then orient the boat downwind of it. And then you're just basically waiting for the dog to have a change of behavior. Eba, what she ends up doing when she smells a sample is she'll just be kind of hanging out on the front of the boat. And then when she smells it, she gets really stiff, like, whoa. And then she'll start to sniff the air, like sniff up the air, where she's trying to catch the odor. And then as soon as she locks onto it, she'll go to the part of the boat that is where the strongest scent cone, the strongest portion of the scent cone is coming to the boat. And that's where she's going to go. And as the boat's moving, that scent cone is going to change and the smell is going to change direction. And so Eba's always going to be trying to maneuver her body around the boat. And so I'm just, as the driver, And right now, both driver and handler or observer, my husband is on the boat with me right now because of COVID. The idea is just to follow her nose, and she's going to continually want to point her nose into the direction of where that smell is coming from the strongest. And so it ends up being this series of maneuvers kind of back and forth, out of the wind at a 90 degree and then directly into the wind, and then back out to a 90 degree and then into the wind. And it's amazing, but the dogs will take us right to a sample. Again, like I said earlier in the evening, that the dogs can smell these samples up to a mile away. And so right now, to answer the last part of that question, she is the only dog that is trained for the Scat project right now. But in the past, we've had about 5 dogs go through and work with us. The longest term one was Tucker, a big, amazing black lab that we worked with. He's retired now and living, I think, in Wisconsin or something with his former trainer. And we worked with him from 2007 through about 2017. So 10 years with Tucker. And Eba's young. Eba's just about 5.5 now. So she's got at least another 5, 6, 7 years on her for this study.
That's great to hear. We've also got some thank yous in the comment section for your whale greeting / party story. The welcoming ritual is cool. I've never heard of that. I think it's criminal the way we've been abusing these intelligent and loving beings for so long and for money. A lot of folks certainly disheartened with the way that we've been managing our oceans. But I'm going to move on to Kevin and Shawnecee. We've got a question here that asks, is it easy to distinguish right whales from other whales in a sighting? So, you showed us the image of, I believe it was a flipper or a dorsal fin, kind of up in the air. How do you distinguish, like visually, North Pacific right whales, but are there also any kind of behavioral differences between how right whales behave versus, say, other species of whales?
Yeah, so yes, to all those things. There are visual differences and behavioral differences, and it's good to know how to tell them apart. One, if you see one, you want to know what you're looking at. But not all of them, but many of the ones that are seen outside the Bering Sea and the ones in the Bering Sea are seen with humpback whales. And so humpback whales there's tens of, I don't know what the number is. There's a lot of humpback whales, wonderfully so right now. They're like historic, what we think is historic numbers. And so if you go looking for a right whale, you're going to see a lot of humpback whales. And the thing you're looking for is, first, from a distance, the right whale has a heart-shaped blow. And so when they spout, it's like bushy and shaped like a heart. Which is very sweet, of course. And so at a distance, if you're seeing whales blowing and you think it might be a right whale, you look for that heart-shaped blow. And then, but many humpback whale blows, winds, if it's windy or there's waves or whatever, it can also discouragingly look like heart-shaped blows. But then as you get closer, a right whale has no dorsal fin. It's black. It's usually big. And then they're covered. Wait, hold on.
Oh.
And so they have, no dorsal fin, which a humpback whale and most other whales have dorsal fins. And then they have these little white spots on them, which are called callosities. And these are actually rough patches that, just like with the orcas, Giles was talking about how if the orcas go extinct, it's going to be the only population that goes extinct if the southern resident killer whales anyways go extinct, where we know every individual. And the reason we know every individual orca is because the markings on them, their patterns on them are unique to each individual. So if you take a picture of one, you can recognize what individual that is. And those patterns they stay the same throughout time for the most part. And right whale callosities act the same as well. And so these white patterns that they have, as well as like this white pattern they have on the belly, is the same throughout time. So if you think it's a right whale, you look for the callosities on them. And then, of course, if you see one and you have a camera, you get pictures of those callosities, because then researchers can ID it potentially to the individual whale.
Are these ones twins? Do we have twins?
No, they're different. They're in the catalog, the right whale catalog.
Oh,
they're different.
okay.
Yeah.
Where can folks get their hands on those? We might need to sell them in our gift shop.
I mean, also to be able to spot a whale while you're shooting, you definitely need assistance. So, I mean, that was the other thing, is just like having good crew next to you that can spot whales through their binocs and kind of help guide you, you know, especially if it's like high noon and there's a lot of sunlight, it can be really hard to see. So yeah, that's the other thing, is just having people who have maybe never seen a right whale before find a right whale and a group of humpbacks in Swiftsure Bank.
We've got our least sciencey question of the evening from online. They asked, do your whale figures have names? Have you named them?
Pisces.
This one here is named Pisces, and Pisces has been on many adventures, including getting left in the library at the NOAA base for about 5 months, and then recovered by our other film team member, Lindsay Walker. Thank you, Lindsay. Pisces, thanks you. What's yours, Shawnecee?
Leo.
Pisces and Leo. Okay, I'm sensing a theme. Okay, Dr. Giles. The question here: what makes killer whales unlike any other whales? Can you tell us about why they're just so unique? I know you touched on this a bit in your presentation.
Well, killer whales are actually dolphins, the largest of the dolphin family. So that's one difference. And you know, there are. I think that they're, you know, individually in different ecotypes, these different groups of whales around the world. They're just an incredibly, I would say, resourceful and intelligent animal. Not that other whales aren't, but I think that the thing that makes them the most unique is their social dynamics. They're very, very incredibly strong bonds with one another. You know, again, you just don't see in the animal kingdom, you don't see males and females staying with their mom their entire life very often. Some human societies are like that, but generally speaking, one or both of the sexes disperse from mom in order to actually avoid inbreeding, which has become a bit of a problem for the southern residents because there's not enough food to be bringing different family groups and different pods together in the same place at the same time. And so, but, you know, that's kind of a, you know, unfortunate consequence of the lack of prey. But generally speaking, they're very, very tight bonds. I mean, I think most people, people around the world were riveted to the news media, social media channels and news channels in 2018 when we had one of our southern residents, J35, give birth to a baby girl calf who lived less than 30 minutes. And then J35, also known as Telequa, carried that dead baby around for 17 days. That's a testament to the incredibly strong bonds that these animals have for each other. It's never been exhibited quite to that extent, to that degree, but it was undeniable that female was grieving and was just refusing to let her baby go. And so I think some of those things make them really stand out. Not to say that other whales are not bonded with their calf, but no other species stays together with their mom after weaning time, or maybe shortly after that. Most calves disperse from mom at some point in life and stay dispersed. There's probably a few anomalies with that, but yeah, I just, you know, killer whales have a brain that is so complex, it has parts of it that we don't even have, and parts of their brains that are associated with emotion and memory are more developed than ours are. And so when you think about that sort of physiology, it makes you wonder, it makes you stop and think, you know, how much do they really know? How much are they aware of how imperiled they are? And those are the things that really endear them to me.
Dr. Giles, why is it so hard for whale populations to rebound to those pre-whaling levels and to the levels that they've been at historically? Why is it challenging, and why isn't there a quick fix? Why isn't there an easy solution to this issue?
Well, that's a multi pronged question and answer. The short version is that all whale species are different. Their natural history is different. Some whales don't go through extremely long gestation periods. For example, they're not pregnant for very long, relatively speaking, 12 months or so, like humans. Killer whales are get pregnant and stay pregnant ideally for 17 to 18 months. So that's one thing. You know, these are really long-lived animals. They've got long gestation periods, so it just takes a long time to make them. The other thing that's really a big problem for this population, this endangered population of animals, is that we're losing breeding age females, and that's not what needs to be happening. We need to have as many breeding age females in the population as possible, because even in an ideal situation, these females can only get pregnant about every 3 years. A natural, normal birthing interval is every 3 to 5 years. Well, some of these females are getting pregnant. One of the females, J31, who had one of the most recent J-pod babies, J56, she was pregnant 6 times. 6 years that we know of. Those are 6 years that we got fecal samples from her. She could have been pregnant in other years and we just didn't get a sample from her, but she was pregnant 6 times and lost those 6 babies before she was able to successfully bring J56 to full term. And so it's things like that. And what's causing that? You know, we're not very good caretakers of the planet, really, honestly, for any part of the planet, but especially the marine realm. You know, in a lot of ways, people over the centuries, the eons, people have loved, been drawn to the ocean, but also feared the ocean, and just generally not taken care of it in the way that it needs to be. And I think that's a really broad stroke answer to that. But the upshot of it is that we need to be doing things a lot better. We need to stop polluting. You know, these pictures of effluent toxicants going directly into the marine realm. It's not, there was this saying, dilution is the solution to pollution. That was actually like a philosophy about the way that people would deal with rubbish, with garbage, with toxicants, chemicals. Just put it in the ocean. You don't see it anymore. It sinks. You don't see it anymore. It's let's just dilute it, and it's out of sight, out of mind. Well, the ocean's pretty much it's at capacity. And so we really need to change our behavior in order to kind of stop what's happening, and then also change our behavior in order to reverse some of the negative impacts that we've had in the marine realm and the terrestrial realm for that matter.
Yep. If I could jump in here too, one of the things that attracts me to both killer whale conservation and right whale conservation is if you want to save any of these species, which both right whales and southern resident killer whales are just like very critically endangered. But if you want to save either of those species, you have to save the entire ecosystem. And whether that's, you look at the salmon streams, to the salmon rivers, to the North Pacific Ocean for killer whales, and then the entire North Pacific for right whales. And so, like, I'm just as invested in ocean conservation as I am in whale conservation. And it just so happens that, it's easier to maybe focus on one species or something, but looking at these like sort of totem animals, like if you want to save the southern resident killer whale, we have to save our ancient forests in Washington State and in British Columbia, and we have to save herring spawning habitat. And so if we can do this thing, we all the ecosystem comes out better. And that's inspiring to me, and of course like makes for like a very uphill battle, and makes it even that more challenging.
Could you give us some, I'll just leave this open. Are there any conservation success stories that we can look to as, yes, we can do this? Is there any legislation or changes, individual changes or community level changes that kind of give you optimism?
Well, I'm like taking so much optimism from how fast things are changing socially in our country right now, and like that it, like either with COVID or with Black Lives Matter, it's like very obvious that people care about things when they learn about them, and they are willing to sacrifice things in their own lives for this thing that they're learning about and care about. And so like just in the last like month, 2 months, 3 months, I've just like kind of been blown away by like, holy cow, look what humans can do, which is a new narrative for me. And then so like that's kind of big picture. And then there's, there are cases where if you stop doing the thing to the animal that's harming it, it comes back. Like humpback whales and gray whales are now at their like pre-whaling levels for the most part, because we stopped killing them. And if you stop doing that thing and they come back. And of course, with orcas and right whales, there's a lot more, the populations are so small and there's a lot more things affecting them than simply the one thing of whaling. But there are, with both orcas and right whales, there's one thing that is with sound pollution, is a pollution that doesn't persist in the water and affects all whales, including orcas and right whales. And if you stop making that sound, if we turn the ship off or whatever, stop ship, that sound goes away and it's no longer in the ecosystem. And so there's a couple like kind of quick fixes for both these whales that if we chose, we could make happen tomorrow, that sort of give them a little buffer to have these other long-term fixes, like giving them enough food, which for orcas is so crucial. But so that like, if we stop harming them, they can come back. And I do really think that humans have shown this capacity for behavior change, and very much so recently. That thank you for asking that question, so I could bring that up.
Yeah. Anyone else? Are there any other cause for hope? Is there anything that you see that you've been encouraged by, or any success stories that you found in conservation work?
I had an opportunity to be part of the Washington State Governor Inslee's task force. I was on 2 of the work groups, the prey work group and the vessel work group. And that was an 18-month-long process. It was the Southern Resident Killer Whale Recovery Task Force. And some really, really positive things came out of that. Many, many different recommendations that ended up being signed into law. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind, because it's such a kind of iconic thing in the state, is the Washington State Ferries were very, very engaged in that dialogue. And they're making, I think they're making choices for upcoming future ferries to be built in years in advance of when they expected to try and create hybrid ferries. And so those sorts of things, like Kevin's saying, there are things that are going to take a long time to fix, like some of the toxicants that are still plaguing the whales, like DDT and PCBs. These are chemicals that were banned in the early 70s, and they're still making their way up the food chain and into the whales. Those are going to take longer to get a handle on, but some things like quieting ships and making them less polluting, those things are happening much faster than I think most people expected them to. And I think that comes from things like this, evenings like this, where people can come and plug in, or even later, if looking at this video later online, getting educated and getting involved. And start going to meetings, start attending, different, all kinds of different things that have to do with the state. Go and hang out and watch the state legislature at work. Those are things that I think people don't think really matter. But the more people that get engaged and get involved, it does make a significant difference, and it makes things happen a lot faster. And so there are a lot of things like that I'm pretty happy about. Money going into habitat restoration, other monies going into purchasing habitat so that it's protected. And then also some of the phenomenal work going on at the tribal level, at local, regional and state levels, and then from individual nonprofits doing habitat restoration work. Those are all really positive things that I think really got a jump start in the last couple of years, because people are really starting to feel that there's no time like the present. We really have to act if we're going to save these species. And again, I think Kevin was saying it exactly spot on. Everything that we're doing, if we save the southern resident killer whales, we're doing something tremendously successful for the entire Pacific Northwest and all the way down to California. And so that can only have positive benefits for other species, humans included.
Thank you so much. Before we go, are there any other thoughts while we have this platform that anyone would like to share? All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Like I said, we'll hopefully get Dr. Giles's presentation up for everyone, and we'll link to some of these organizations and ways that folks can get involved in the description as we save this video. But before we go, thank you to the three of you, to all of our experts for sharing their time, your expertise, and your experiences with all of us today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to our toy whales, was it Leo and Pisces?
Yeah.
Thank you to Eba. Thank you to everyone that contributes to this work, because it takes a village. Thank you to everybody who's been watching from home. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions. We couldn't do this without you. Hopefully you felt connected to the work that these folks are doing as well. Like we've said, we're going to save this event on PacSci's YouTube page. Please share that with friends and family. We hope you've enjoyed today's event. There is a short survey in the description, so please fill that out. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know how we can continue to improve these events. Sign up for our e-newsletter at pacsci.org/SITC so that you can connect with more local experts and scientists through this programming. And remember to donate to the Pacific Science Center at pacsci.org/support. So we've got time for today, but thank you so much. And hopefully we can do this again in person and connect with folks at the Science Center when it's safe to do so. Thanks everyone for tuning in, but bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.